Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Okay, I don't know what to say. I just absolutely don't know what to say, but according to this article, I do need to say more than I've been saying. I open up my issue of Psychology Today. It's the December 2022 issue, and the opening article it's their Insights article says, "Go ahead, talk more. To make a better first impression, it can help to speak more than you listen." Okay, that's not what I have talked about, or anything like that. I tell people to shut up and listen more. But who am I to say? Who am I to say? Obviously, I'm not going to disagree with research. This research was done out of the Chicago Booth School of Business, University of Chicago Booth School of Business. But anyhow, again, popular advice suggests that listening more than we speak is the best way to build favor, build relationships with certainly new acquaintances. But what they found in this research, that in fact talking more, significantly more, more than half the time, in fact, you come across as being more interesting and more likable. Again, I don't know what to say, because I've told people, and I've tried to adhere to the notion of shut up and listen. And perhaps I'm wrong, or perhaps there's some nuance to this, I don't know. But there were a series of studies published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, and the researchers found what they termed to be the reticence bias. That's reticence, RETICENCE bias. And that bias is a belief amongst participants that they would be perceived as more likable if they spoke less than a stranger with whom they were conversing. Again, I don't know what to say. This flies in the face of everything I know. Not everything I know. It flies in the face of this one little particular aspect of building relationships, that God gave you two ears and one mouth, and you should be using them in proportion, meaning you should talk less and listen more. And according to this research, that's not the case. To be perceived as being interesting and being likable, you need to talk more. And again, the reticence bias, is just this belief that we perceive to be more likable if we listen more. And what they say at the tail end of this article is, well, I guess let me talk about the study real quick. What they did in these in-lab conversations, it was an in-lab study. Participants were assigned to speak for 30% of the time, 40% of the time, 50% of the time, 60% of the time, or 70% of the time. And those who spoke more tended to be considered more likable and more interesting. Now, I don't have the study in front of me, so it's hard for me to say, well, here's the difference. I'm not a social scientist by any stretch of the imagination. I enjoy reading these psychology articles and learning. I think it's fascinating what we're learning about humans and our interactions with one another. But I've always just been of the opinion that, shut up and listen, let people talk. And I think I think there is some truth to that. What they say at the end of the article is that what one of the researchers, Quinn Hershey, I think is how you pronounce it, he warned participants, or warns people against talking more than 70%. So in other words, there's a law of diminishing returns here. If you dominate a conversation, if it's 100% you, yeah, you're probably not going to be likable, and you're probably going to you're not going to be interesting. Well, you might be interesting, but you might be interesting for all the wrong reasons. Um, but they also say going the other direction and not saying anything doesn't work either. And so, you know, 70% is a good percentage of talking, or 50-50. But I think there's probably a whole lot more to the study than this. I'm not debunking the study. I'm not saying I don't believe the study. I can certainly see that. I can see where somebody, depending upon what's coming out of somebody's mouth, and depending upon who they're talking to, that somebody who is talking more and listening less would be considered likable and more interesting. Obviously, if you're not saying anything, it's hard to be interesting, and people can't really assess whether you're likable. But if you're if you're talking, the other extreme is if you're talking all the time, it's certainly a problem. But when you have an opportunity to talk, you have an opportunity to kind of express your, give somebody a foothold to like you. I guess that can fly in the other direction too, depending upon what you're saying and who you're talking to. But you give people a foothold to like you, and you also give people a foothold to think you're interesting. If all you're doing is saying people aren't necessarily going to. There's nothing there to think you're interesting about. But if you're talking about whatever, your stories, how you got to where you are, people find you interesting. And there's probably some validity to it. Again, you have to, it all depends, right? I mean, we're not mixing chemicals here where, two parts um, 2 parts of hydrogen and 1 part of oxygen makes water every time, pretty much every time. Under normal conditions, every time you're going to end up with water. Um, Obviously, somebody talking 70% of the time, their level of likability and being interesting is going to depend upon what they're saying and who's hearing it, and so on and so forth. But again, I was just totally blown away when I saw this particular article, and when I started reading about this study. So, like I said, I don't know what to say. I think you kind of have to go with your gut. I think you have to go with your gut in conversations. And, as the author says, don't talk all the time, but you should feel comfortable. You should at least feel comfortable speaking more than you typically would. And we all get in these conversations where it's like, I'll be saying to myself, geez, I'm talking a lot. Geez, I got to get them talking. And it's just not happening. You can't get them going. They're asking you questions, and you can't just, well, I'm not answering that until you answer. You can't do that. And so you have those thoughts in your head that maybe I'm talking too much, and maybe not. I guess based on this article, maybe not. Maybe somebody's, maybe you carrying a conversation, you being the one who's actually talking, is a good thing based on this, because they're just not comfortable sharing, and they want you to share for whatever reason. But I thought it was an interesting article. Go ahead, talk more, and I think there's certainly limits to this. 70% is a good threshold. Certainly 50-50 is a good threshold. But you need to be cognizant when you're talking with people about you kind of get. And I guess I started down this path before. You have to use your gut and just see what's happening. Are they open to talking? And what's their level of comfort? I mean, if you're dominating a conversation and cutting someone off, yeah, that's not going to be good either. But if they're leaned into what you have to say and are intrigued by who you are and maybe find value in the insight that you're sharing or the stories you're telling, how you became successful, that might be something really of interest to them. And the fact that you're being vulnerable enough to share those sorts of things, your lessons, yeah, I can see where that would make you likable. I do also see where people like to share their stories, and you just have to you got to kind of go with your gut, know when to shut up, and know when to speak up. It's really what it boils down to. But I don't know what to say. But I've gone on for about 10 minutes here, so I guess I filled the void. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.